This video will give you an overview of JavaScript basics you need to work with React. Topics that we will cover here will be bare or blank return statements, destructuring assignment, imports and exports, arrow functions, and template strings. You might already know some or all of these. If so, you can skip this and go right to the next part, where we will go deeper into React itself. One small thing to be aware of when doing React development are bare or blank return statements. The code that we see here will actually not work as intended in JavaScript, because the return would be interpreted as its own statement and the template will actually be disregarded. This is called automatic semicolon insertion in JavaScript. The way to fix this could of course be to write the template directly after the return statement, or to surround it with round brackets, which would start on the same line as the return statement. With destructuring assignment, we can assign to multiple variables at the same time. For example, we could use that to condense this longer version of reading from window.location into several variables into a short one-liner. Here, the properties protocol, host, and path name of the location object would all be extracted into separate variables. And something similar is possible for the contents of arrays. For example, in the first line here, you can see the contents of the array 1, 2, 3 being assigned the variable names a, b, and c. Or in the second example, it could be that a longer computation would return some results, but also some logging information. And that could be the content of an array with two separate entries. In React, of course, we've already seen this when using the useState hook. The state hook will return the current state and a corresponding setter in an array of length 2, and we can assign variable names to both of these entries. In JavaScript, we can export objects from one file and then import them inside another JavaScript file. For example, here we can declare a variable called foo and a function called bar, and we could export them from this JavaScript file. Another way to do that would be via direct exports. I can just place the name export directly in front of the declaration of the variable or function. And that second code section would be equivalent to the first one we can see here. If we have exported something in one file, we can import it in the other file, and this is how we could do that. We would have to give the path of the other file. Note that in many bundlers, like for example Webpack, we can leave out the file name extension, JS in this case. Default exports are something special in JavaScript, which are not really found in any other programming language. We can declare one export as the default export inside a module. This can often be the main function or object that we want to declare inside that module. And we can declare that by writing export default. Here, for example, this is used to export a React component. And here we see how we can mix named and default imports. The named imports would be inside of curly braces, and if I write something outside of the curly braces, this will be the default export. I can actually use any name to import the default export. It does not necessarily have to be the same name as in the file itself. When using React, it is common to export components as default exports. And for things that are not components, I would usually recommend to export them as named exports. As we've already seen in the picture slideshow example, we can write anonymous functions as so-called arrow functions. To declare such functions, we begin with the parameter list in brackets, then we write an arrow, and then we can write the function body inside of curly braces. We can also make use of a short notation in some cases. So some simple functions can use this shorter notation down here, where I leave out the curly braces and also leave out the return statement and just provide one single expression that will determine the return value. And finally, one more thing I want to mention are template strings. Template strings are delimited by backticks. They can be used to create strings which also contain interpolated values. For example, here I would include the value of the name variable via this specific syntax at $sign and curly braces. Now that we've brushed up on our JavaScript knowledge, we're ready to dive deeper into React in the next part.